Libera that is managing our Zoom conference. Today we will talk about a lot of topics. We talk about data, about activism, confiscated assets, training, education, and the fil rouge that all these topics together is the possibility of activating bottom-up monitoring actions. But now, first of all, I ask to the Ambassador Deborah Lepore to take the floor and talk about our event. Thank you for your presence.
Yes. Good morning to everybody, first of all. Dear Ms. Rispoli, dear professors, connected or not, panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by expressing my country, my personal appreciation to Libera and the University of Pisa for having organized this side event on such a key, I would say, relevant key item, which concerns an asset of incomparable value, which is democracy. Never enough to speak about democracy. As the Secretary General Kofi Annan wrote in his famous foreword to the UNCAC in 2003, corruption is an insidious plague that undermines democracy and the rule of law. 13 years later, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, baking the widespread desire expressed by global civil society for deeper engagement with the UN during an informal meeting of the General Assembly, acknowledged that civil society is a key instrument for the success of today's United Nations. Also foreseeing that dialogue and cooperation with civil society, and I quote for sure, will be a central aspect of the activities of the United Nations, making sure that partnership becomes a key element in solving global problems. Quite ambitious, but very relevant. What links these two statements? Not only, I mean, the speaker's role, but there are two key words, I would say: democracy and civil society, evoking intertwining concepts, particularly relevant with reference to the topic of this side event: corruption. Corruption is a scourge that can eat away at the foundation of the democratic institutions. Good morning. Civil society is a factor that can help to reverse the curse, rehabilitating and invigorating democracy. Because democracy also lives on the active participation of citizens, mostly on the active participations of citizens. And civil society, through awareness raising and citizens' involvement, can help turn the tide and restore trust to citizens. As foreseen by the Secretary General, civil society has emerged as an important actor across the UN's activity, from preventing conflicts to promoting human rights. It's been playing an important role in preventing and combating corruption as well. To this end, bottom-up, you said so, involvement of citizens in anti-corruption monitoring is a prominent example. If we want to win this battle, we must start from the bottom, involving citizens, spreading a culture of legality that plays as a social antidote to corruption. But people must be motivated, which is not at all easy, and involved. A difficult task which governments are not always able to tackle alone. Civil society, with its extraordinary human capital, at the end of the day, can provide concrete support to this end. Focusing on monitoring, let me highlight a couple of aspects. First of all, monitoring progress and challenges during the implementation process of the anti-corruption strategies may assist in strengthening the overall effectiveness of the strategy per se, and may form the basis for its own improvement. Secondly, but not less important, monitoring, and civic monitoring in specific, is one of the most productive interactions springing from civil society, since it's a powerful driver for accountability. So ITA, it's not a slogan, meaning integrity, transparency, and accountability. There are the three pillars holding the architecture of the anti-corruption system. They are intertwined in more than one ways, and I think that what we are going to share today will enlighten us also on this. Because transparency in public activities is key to preventing corruption and holding public officials and governments accountable, while accountability triggers integrity. It is a virtuous circle that civic monitoring helps to move ahead. As external partners, indeed, so CSOs, civil society organizations, can encourage organizational transparency so that public officials act visibility and comprehensively in order to promote participation and accountability. Just to conclude, allow me to say a couple of words on the Italian commitment in this regard. Italy has always supported in the widest, I would say, participation of relevant CSOs and NGOs in the Conference of the State Parties to UNCAC, and has always upheld the spirit of cooperation and constructive exchange required by the Convention. At this very conference, this one ongoing, Italy presented and is negotiating a resolution on the links between corruption and organized crimes that specifically invites state parties to partner with academia, civil society, and the private sector to collect experiences, challenges, and good practices that address corruption related to organized crime, including on the best practices for providing a safe and enabling environment for whistleblowers, for example. Of course, we are also committed to supporting the reference of civil society involvement in all other resolutions. Furthermore, Italy adopted various measures aimed at promoting transparency and the proactive participation of civil society and private sector in preventing and combating corruption and other serious crimes internally and at international level, such as, a couple of examples, there is legislation on transparency, which refers to civil society widespread control over the work of the public administration and grants total accessibility of data and documents held by public administrations, one. Second, the new and comprehensive regulation of whistleblowing recently adopted, implementing the whistleblowing EU directive, targeting any unlawful conduct and providing a long series of protection for whistleblowers. Third, the best practice of the Interinstitutional Committee on International Anti-Corruption Activities, which effectively includes civil society and private sector. It is mentioned as, and I guess not by hazard, as a model in the second cycle National UNCAC Review Report, and as well as the OECD fourth phase report. In conclusion, from the Italian perspective, we nurture a new approach going beyond the worldwide recognized multi-stakeholder expression or concept, which evokes in some way a concept of counterparts. We prefer to speak about an effective multi-shareholder approach, which brings about responsibility, giving civil society an active and key voice in anti-corruption policy making. Is it enough? I don't know, we will see, but we are trying. We are here to listen to you and to learn from your experience. We strongly believe indeed that listening, sharing, and working together, everyone making his own contribution, can really make the difference. So thank you very much for your attention. Grazie.
Thank you, Ambassador Deborah Lepore, for your warm greeting and also for your very focused contribution. Thank you very much. And now we have to cover something like 10,000 miles because we have to join Sydney, where Professor John Keane teaches at the Sydney University. He is the co-founder and director of the Sydney Democratic Network. Unfortunately, Professor Keane could not be here physically, but he kindly sent us a video that helps us to frame the topic of civic monitoring in the context of contemporary democracies. So please. Mr. Keane, the floor is yours. Maybe we have some technical problem. No, we cannot hear. Maybe there is some setting that doesn't work.
Cos'è che non si sente?
Let's play, Monica, let's play the video, please.
My name is John Keane. I wish very much that I could be with you in Atlanta in this very important UN Convention Against Corruption session, strengthening democracy through civic monitoring. Alas, I'm in Sydney. Thank you for coming. I wanted to thank also warmly, grazie tante, to Francesca Rispoli and Alberto Vanucci for organizing this session. My subject is democracy. As we all know, it's a tricky word. Considered as a way of people governing themselves through their chosen and appointed representatives, democracy is both a special method of defining and handling power, and it's also a whole way of life. As I've tried to show in my very long 1,000-page history of democracy, the life and death of democracy, and in a much shorter version, more recently, the shortest history of democracy, democracy can be destroyed in very quick time, in a trice. We also know from recent worldwide experiences, say in Central and Eastern Europe and in Africa, that building a resilient democracy is very hard work, that it can take years or even longer for people and their representatives to appreciate its benefits and learn to live together democratically. In our times, democracy has come to be called what I myself call monitory democracy. This is a new form of historical democracy that, in my view, was born in the 1940s. It was born after a half-century catastrophe of totalitarianism, of armed military dictatorial rule, and so on, 2 global wars. It was also a form of democracy imagined in the 1940s that was not reducible to merely free and fair elections, which were, of course, used by Hitler to gain power to destroy democracy. Monitory democracy, my phrase, can be defined in the following way. It's nothing less than the free and fair periodic election of representatives to legislatures, but it's something very much more. Monitory democracy requires a plethora of watchdog bodies, independent courts, uncorrupted electoral commissions, anti-corruption agencies, bioregional assemblies, to name a few, truth and reconciliation tribunals. That is a robust plurality of independent watchdog bodies, including, of course, independent media platforms, whose job is publicly to scrutinize governments, big businesses, and other organizations, and to put a stop to abuses and injustices wherever power is exercised, so to say, from the bedroom to the battlefield. When understood in this rather unorthodox and thoroughly 21st century way, democracy at the upper levels of government can durably function only when citizens down below in everyday life live to the full the norms of equality, freedom, solidarity, and respect for social differences. Jürgen Habermas and deliberative Democrats have, in my view, misled us. Democracy is more than elections, it's more than public deliberation, it is a whole way of life. It's a special form of social interaction and self-expression in which people from different walks of life can rub shoulders, see eye to eye, cooperate and compromise, and generally think of themselves as the equals of each other. Democracy in this sense is only possible when there is a civil society that's acutely conscious of its ecological foundations. In other words, when citizens live together non-violently in various social associations and communities, treat each other as equals worthy of respect and dignity, as well as understand the need to honor and respect the eco-environments in which they dwell on our planet. Here there is, of course, a normative implication of this definition of democracy as monitory democracy. What is so good about monitory democracy? In a sentence or two, understood as a whole way of life, it has the great advantage of enabling humans, wherever they live, across borders even, to stand courageously against abuses of power, to be on the lookout for corrupt rulers and fools who bring misery to people's lives and help damage their ecosystems. There's a strategic question, of course. How is democracy, in this sense of monitory democracy, to be protected against its enemies? I would say that the important thing to understand when considering these normative and strategic questions is that democracy is much more than pressing a button or ticking a box on a ballot paper. It goes well beyond the mathematical certitude of election results and majority rule and talk of minority rights. It's not reducible to lawful rule through independent courts or attending local public meetings, participating in street demonstrations and keeping up with the breaking news. No, a well-functioning monitory democracy requires freedom from violence, hunger, and personal humiliation. Democracy is saying no to the brazen arrogance of callous employers who maltreat their workers as mere commodities and deny them the right to form independent trade unions or refuse to pay them sufficient reward to live comfortably. Democracy is at odds with unbridled capitalism. Profit-hungry, unregulated capitalism leads inevitably to the destruction of civil society and its delicate eco-foundations. The protection of people and their habitats against predatory power, which monitory democracy promises, implies as well the rejection of racism, of misogyny, of religious bigotry, of animal cruelty, and all other types of human and non-human indignity. Monitory democracy is humility. It's the willingness to admit that impermanence renders all life vulnerable, that in the end nobody is invincible, and that ordinary lives are never ordinary. I have tried with an Indian colleague in a book called To Kill a Democracy, to show that democracy, monitory democracy, is about sharing and caring for others. It's tenderness with children and respect for women. It's the raw willingness to reject prejudices about the inevitability of social injustices. Monitory democracy is freedom from fear of police violence, the right not to be shot or arrested arbitrarily by soldiers. It's equal access to decent public transport and medical care and sympathy for those who have fallen behind. Democracy is free access to information and a learned sense of worldly wonder. It's the everyday ability to handle unexpected situations and make judgments wisely. I've tried to show in my work that democracy is the friend of contingency. To live democratically is to refuse the dogma that things can't be changed because they're so-called naturally fixed in stone, the way things are. By arousing dissatisfaction with present-day conditions and fostering hopes for a better future, democracy thus stretches people's horizons of expectations. That's why there are moments when democracy thus implies the need for insurrection, the refusal to put up with everyday forms of injustice and hypocrisy, corruption, idolatry and bullying, poverty, broken hearts, and other forms of social degradation. I thank you for your attention. I wish you very well in this session, and I wish I could have been with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to Professor Keane. This is
Good afternoon.
An important contribution because it helps us to hold together a theory reflection about the monitoring democracy with a practical approach. And so let's go at the heart of our meeting, and we illustrate some experiences that we hope that can be used as good practices. First of all, Elisa Orlando, here near me, from Libera NGO, that explain us a model used in recent year in Italy. Elisa, what does the concept of community monitoring refer to in your experience?
Thank you. So we will jump now to the more experienced side. So the time is short, but I will try to give you an overview of what we do in Italy. So just a few words about Libera, if you not know the organization. Libera is a network of associations, unions, movements, groups, schools, universities, founded in 1995, which were peculiar years in Italian history, where civil society really felt the need to come together and build a coalition against mafia and corruption, but above all for social justice, for the search for truth, and for the protection of rights. And one of the founding actions of the association was the collection of 1 million signatures for the promotion of a popular a law proposal and then law, which is still in force in Italy, for the social reuse, providing for the social reuse of confiscated assets from mafia and corruption. And I'm not sure if it works. All right, so we are organized through regional offices and more than 200 local seats. And actually, we also promote some international networks in Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. Since 2016, Libera has been promoting also these community-based monitoring initiatives called COMMON from the Italian. It's an abbreviation for Comunità Monitoranti, so monitoring communities, which is for us an empowering strategy for civic anti-corruption action. So where we start from is directly from law 190, which entered in force in 2012 in Italy, and which introduced a system of prevention of corruption, closely linked to administrative transparency. And in the law, it's written this transparency is there for widespread control by civic actors, by the citizens, by the citizenry. So that's the mandate we have taken on. And with the idea of building what Professor Keane was mentioning, this system of widespread independent watchdog bodies and groups that look how the public power is used, how the state spends its resources, how it organizes and makes decisions. And we have decided to do it with communities, with groups. We don't want to ask individuals to expose and carry the burden of an action alone, but we want to rebuild this community, with this sense of community and collective action. And we as Libera act only as catalysts, so to say. So we empower local communities to be active in their context, in their city, in their region. We provide community building activities, trainings, for instance, on how to use the transparency tools, how to send access to information requests. We mentor them all along the process, and we provide networking with experts, other civic initiatives, and also among themselves. This is our method or methodology of civic engagement we have come up with. We call it Common Compass. So it's a recipe on how to build monitoring communities in 10+1 steps, starting from what we call illuminating, so shedding light, which is all about, as I said, using this transparency, which is provided by the administrative side, as a way of collecting data, understanding whichever field of the public arena that citizens and the groups are interested in, and also adding with civic data. Then the phase of monitoring, where we see all the action that may come to your mind, like advocacy and advocacy demands towards institutions, communicate also with the general public about what we're doing. And the last phase, which we may call correlating with the institutions, we mean that at some point we really need to come to a stage where we also co-design anti-corruption strategies, anti-corruption, some code of conducts, code of ethics, and also all the other actions that on the local level support social justice all along civic monitoring. We do a lot of training once a year, this national meeting, Scuola Common, which brings together local activists, but also experts and academia. Also thanks to the support of the University of Pisa, which we are very connected to, but also many local appointments for training that are dedicated to specific targets. So maybe educators or unions, young people, or tailored on specific topics. I want to give you just a few examples of what we are doing. So since last year, 1.5 years ago, actually, we are monitoring, for instance, the use of the EU Recovery and Resilience Funds in Italy. We produced a participatory monitoring campaign based on our local activists all over Italy in verifying the state of transparency on this project. When we started, there was a database which was really incomplete and not updated. And we are working all along as more data are coming and verifying them also through the institutional websites of local administration and double check with the national ones. We do a lot as this is like a funding topic of our association. We monitor a lot the public and social use of confiscated assets in Italy. There is also transparency provided by law. So administration who has a confiscated asset in their territory, they should publish data, but this data is not always there, is not always updated, is not always homogeneous. So we advocate for institutional transparency. We advance transparency with crowdsourced civic data on confiscated assets. Sometimes we ourselves going to the administration saying, you know that you have these new confiscated assets in your city, right? So let's reuse it together. Let's design a reuse for that. And of course, all this data is not is just there really for promoting advocacy. And so for us, in this sense, civic monitoring is a tool available also to victims of corruption and organized crime, individuals, but in a collective sense, above all, to see which measures and which reparation is provided to them. We do the same at the European level. We just cut short, and just the last slides to say that we also try to translate this method, for civic engagement and for activism also to education tools and methodology. And we have done this through a European project called U-Monitor, which has finished, and you can download the toolkit if you like. I put some flyers there with a QR code, and we're also about just starting a new project where we will develop online platform with digital educational tools, interactive tools like escape games as well. And this is our mascot, Mombo the cat. So it's really, we don't want to do boring anti-corruption. Anti-corruption for us looks like this. That's it.
Thank you, Elisa. So now let's talk about confiscated assets, one of the topic of the Elisa presentation. The following speaker talk us about the situation in Argentina, because Clara Ines Lucarella is a lawyer and is the coordinator of the Strength and Democracy Program in Asociación Civil por la Igualdad y la Justicia. Clara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to this event, and thank you for being here today. Maybe I would want to... Great. So, as Francesca said, I'm here to tell you about the project, or the Proyecto Bien Restituido. That is a project we are implementing in Argentina together with other 3 organizations, apart from ASIG, that is the organization I am a part of. This project is being implemented by Libera, ASIG, Multipolar and Círculo Jurídico in Argentina. And the main objective of this project has to do with the establishment of a public policy in Argentina that promotes the social reuse of assets that are confiscated from crimes committed, from corruption, from human trafficking, drug trafficking, criminal organizations, with the aim of reusing these assets in order to effectively repair direct and indirect victims of these crimes. So, of course, this policy and this project is based on what the policy implemented in Italy and what Libera is doing over there and has been doing for these last lots of years. And of course, what we have seen and what is happening all around the world is that although there are laws that say that confiscated assets should be used to repair victims of crimes, there are still few projects and few public policies that effectively do this. So this is what we are trying to do in Argentina, and specifically with the project Bien Restituido. I would like to tell you about some of the main challenges we face in Argentina to establish a policy like this and what we are doing as part of the project. On the one hand, well, of course, and I guess that similar things happen in Italy, and I guess that that is a problem that probably many countries face, that it has to do with the lack of information or complete information about the recovered assets. We have, thanks to this project, we were able to start looking for more information about recovered assets in Argentina. And we have a number that is that in the last or at least 9 years, more than 5,000 assets have been recovered, but we are sure that this number is quite small and there is still a lot of information that is missing about these assets, where they are at, who is managing them, in what conditions, and even their value. On the second hand, well, civil society is still not included in the decision-making process on what should we do with the assets and what should we do with when assets are recovered. The third problem, or the third challenge, has to do with the fact that even though assets are being recovered constantly in Argentina, and this is something we know that happens and the judiciary does all the time, there is no, since this public policy is still missing and we don't have like common grounds on what should we do with recovered assets, what happens is that assets lose their value and it is not possible to use them after it. And this, of course, affects the possibility to use these assets in order to repair damage caused to victims. And again, I'm talking about direct and indirect victims of these crimes. So when this question arises constantly, and one of the things that we are needing, at least in our country, has to do with a public policy of these characteristics. And finally, although again there isn't as explicit laws that establishes the social use of assets, there are some isolated experiences around our country that, of course, we are being monitored and we are seeing what is going on and seeing its effects. So with these challenges in mind, we created this project that we are implementing in Argentina with these organizations. And I have to say that it is not only these 4 organizations that I mentioned before that are part of the project, but there are more than 50 organizations, civil society organizations, but also unions for worker unions that support what we are trying to establish in Argentina. So the first thing and the first proposal has to do with, of course, to ensure a public policy in order to adequately care, manage, and use the assets, of course, with the social use of assets. On the second hand, we propose to establish a national public registry of seized or confiscated and recovered assets. Again, there is still a lack of information about what is going on with assets in Argentina and their value, where they're at, what we can do with them, especially taking into consideration that the objective is to effectively use and socially reuse them. In the meantime, and this is something I would like to tell you in line with what we've been talking about civic monitoring, from the project, with the information that is available in our country right now, we are creating and we are designing a platform, a website that shows, as well as, of course, always taking into consideration the experience of Libera and the government of Italy. We are creating a website that shows which are the confiscated assets right now and where they're at in the different provinces in Argentina, in order to start creating this culture of civic monitoring regarding what is, of course, the recovery of assets and what can happen with them. Our third point has to do with the fact that a federal agency should be creating in order to administrate and, after destiny, have or create a social use for these assets. What this particular thing of this agency has to do with the participation. It is not created yet. We presented a law at Congress that is still pending to be approved, but this agency has the participation and explicitly establishes the participation of civil society in the decision-making process. So this is something that, of course, contributes to what will happen at that agency and the decisions that will be made there. And finally, of course, the fact that this project wants the public policy to be established that says specifically, and the mandate to be specifically, that the assets should be used and reused by the state and or civil society organizations that have a specific mandate or a specific objective to repair direct and indirect victims of these crimes. To wrap up, of course, this project has been going on for the last 3 years. I'll leave you the information of Instagram if you want to see a little bit more about what we are doing, and there are some brochures at the table. And of course, I'm available for any questions you may have on this matter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clara. Now, our last speaker via Zoom from Italy, Professor Alberto Vannucci. Hope that the link is working.
Can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. Professor Vannucci is
a
full professor.
No, okay. There is no video. I'm going only with the audio. Okay. I'm not allowed, apparently, to use my webcam. So I will only talk then. Okay.
It's a radio link.
like a podcast. It will sound like a podcast. Okay.
So, Professor Vannucci, let me introduce you. You are a full professor of political science at the University of Pisa and the director of the Master of Analysis, Prevention and Fight Against Organized Crime and Corruption. So the question is, which is the role of academia to study, analyze, and also support through training the civic initiative about monitoring in our experience in Pisa?
Greetings from Pisa, first of all. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to be with you, but unfortunately I couldn't. So, starting from John Keen's consideration on monitoring democracy, I'd like to go into what was asked to me, so explain the role that universities can play in this process of empowering monitoring communities. But I would like to start talking also about my view on what corruption is and what with the theoretical approach can be the role of monitoring communities, which means groups of citizens actively cooperating in a collective action aimed at to supervise public power, can play in our fight against corruption. So, monitoring democracy is something that goes beyond the electoral process, and electoral accountability is what John Keynes told us. So it is something which requires the concomitant functioning of a plurality of independent watchdog bodies whose purpose is to scrutinize the exercise of public power. But not only public power, I would like to add. Any kind of a watchdog body should also exercise some kind of a control over big business and how big business tend to interfere and, in the worst case scenario, capture regulators, public decision makers. I strongly believe that the most deceptive manifestation of the so-called state capture is a form of hidden and accountable influence of powerful private interest on public power, a distortion which we may call legalized corruption. We all know that in very general terms, corruption is defined as a misuse of public power for private benefits, or even more generally as the abuse of any entrusted power for private gain. But we have to acknowledge that a misuse or an abuse is not a self-evident reality. Who and how is decided what is an abuse? What distinguishes an abuse of power from an acceptable use of power? There is a problem in singling out the standards against which this violation of a boundary of acceptableness in the exercise of power can be assessed. Different standards normally coexist in the same context, sometimes currently, other times conflicting. We can observe the formal boundary of the legal norms, the criminal code usually. But there is also the implicit judgment of the public opinion when there is a scandal, for instance, or the ideas and values behind any notion of public interest. So corruption is defined as the betrayal of the public interest. And there is also the application, which can be done also at the individual level, of any kind of ethical criteria. To sum up, corruption in the public sector is a violation of official and formal, but also of unwritten and informal rules, stating the obligations of public officials, political or bureaucratic actors, in the management of public affairs. Having different criteria to recognize the abuse of power implies having different institutional and social processes to detect corrupt practices. Processes, a series of processes which involve different actors as monitoring and enforcing agents, the judiciary, other supervising bodies, the political class, the media system, the public opinion, but also communities of citizens. This implies also that besides what is stated by legal norms, more specifically by the criminal codes, corruption in the public sector is a socially constructed concept, which is based on citizens' more or less shared sense of what is acceptable in the acts and attitudes of their rulers. So, democracy is complicated. It requires individual's energy, commitment, involvement, personal accountability. We live in an era in which the legitimacy of democracy is severely challenged. Distrust emerged, fostering new successful populist appeals. So, to be legitimized in the eye of citizens, democracy has to be effective. This means that the exercise of democratic power has to produce its expected outcomes of responsiveness to public needs and demands, but also responsiveness to our views of social justice, freedom, equality. So, scientific research confirms a common sense observation. When there is more corruption, where corruption is perceived as rampant, there is less trust in public institutions. More corruption is associated also with less trust among individuals, which means poor social capital. This is not a surprise at all. In its essence, corruption is a betrayal of trust, recognized and sanctioned by other institutional or social actors. And interpersonal and institutional trust is a precious and fragile resource. Corruption determines its erosion and destruction, which prepare the conditions for further corruption. In other words, the perception of the widespread corruption interacts with the dissolution of public trust in a vicious circle, whose final outcome is the current crisis of democratic values. So, the role of and function of a monitoring communities can be framed theoretically both as an input and as an output of our constant struggle and search for a good government, corrupt government. In other words, monitoring communities can activate a series of virtuous circles, strengthening democratic values and institutions. So, on the input side, monitoring community can play a role which goes far beyond the simplest one, so the role of an additional watchdog from below. Monitoring community can play an educating role, contributing to educate the citizen to democratic values and practices. Therefore, it can become a social agent for the construction of a more severe, stringent, and ethically binding cultural and political conception of corruption. Second, the creation and enduring supervision activities of monitoring communities tend to strengthen cooperative social interactions. In other words, it spontaneously generates social capital. It activates bonds of interpersonal trust, which, as was demonstrated by the political scientist Robert Putnam, make vertical accountability more effective and induce good governance in the management of public affairs. Third, the network of monitoring community can provide a social infrastructure for the circulation of information on conditions and effects of the exercise of public power, therefore increasing accountability. Fourth point, how to recognize the subtle, elusive form of corruption, such as legalized corruption, as I call it before, which cannot be reported to judges. we have to look at its costs, the huge social, environmental, material damages suffered by communities due to the abuses of power. So more sophisticated forms of corruption can be recognized and sanctioned only by its direct victims. Monitoring communities are the natural context in which citizens can gain awareness and mobilize against it. The activity of monitoring communities can in fact increase social awareness in the appalling effects of corruption, therefore facilitating social mobilization and political responsiveness to community needs, good government again. Fifth and last point, on the input side, the action of monitoring communities can contribute to express the public judgment which expose to social and political sanctioning all the recognized abuses of entrusted power, therefore discouraging them. There are also positive effects of the action of monitoring community on the output side of the political system. For instance, the effort and challenge of monitoring communities try to know and supervise public activities and decision-making can be directly encouraged by far-sighted politicians or functionaries willing to acquire a more in-depth social evaluation of the needs and of the quality of public services and policies. Second, the mobilization of monitoring communities is favored and at the same time tend to strengthen a social and cultural awareness of the importance of transparency induced by good governance. So by the political and administrative implementation of more effective anti-corruption tools. Last point, and I'm going to conclude. John Keane explained us that democracy, it's not only a practice or a procedure, it's a set of values and a way of life, a social interaction in which people can cooperate to improve their quality of life. Monitory democracy is good because it enables human beings to stand against abuses of entrusted power. But as a prerequisite, democracy has to allow citizens to see and recognize such abuses of power. And here it comes a last and crucial role of monitoring communities and the importance of the role that university can play in this context. To be realized with impunity, corrupt practices, all the abuses of entrusted power need to be hidden to the public scrutiny. The slogan officially adopted by the Washington Post originally was "Democracy dies in darkness." But there are at least 3 ways in which abuses of power and corruption can be hidden. In the dark, not to be seen as abuses. In the disguise of manipulation, not to be perceived as abuses. And in the technical complexity of decision-making, technocracy, not to be identified as abuses. So, to expose and sanction the corresponding abuses, we need different resources. We need transparency, freedom of information against the dark. But we need education and civic awareness against disguise and manipulation. And finally, we need scientific knowledge and technical expertise against the fog of complex decision-making. This can explain the role that universities, the professors, researchers, the academic community in general can and should play within monitoring communities or as a monitoring community in itself. Communities have to be complemented by an enlarged epistemic community to be able to effectively monitor darkness, disguise, and complexity of public power, all factors which increase the risks of abuses. This can and hopefully will include academic experts who can help citizens to evaluate the relevance of public issues, to assess the potential effectiveness of policy solutions, and more importantly, to recognize and monitor potentially abuses of power, corruption. And while they empower monitoring communities, my conclusive remarks, universities will also empower themselves as an active actor in triggering a virtuous circle of trust building in the value of institutions. I hope you appreciated this podcast version of my
Thank you, Professor Vannucci.
Thank you for your attention.
your rich contribution also includes our conclusive remarks, because it was a really rich contribution. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A because we have to leave the room for the following meeting, but here we are, so we can share some other insight informally here around the COSP. I thank you to every speakers and also you for your presence, and see you soon. Thank you.